The Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' powerful call to a transformed and grace-filled life. The Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew chapters 5 to 7, is one of Jesus' most powerful and revolutionary teachings. In it, Christ presents us with a new way of seeing the world, a call to humility, justice, and love that challenges the superficial values of modern society. Instead of focusing solely on rules, Jesus leads us to a transformation of the heart, revealing how we can be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. In this text, we will delve deeply into Jesus' teachings and discover how they are as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. Prepare to be challenged and inspired to live according to divine justice and to trust fully in God, even amidst the uncertainties of life. Beatitudes, the path of humility and justice. The Beatitudes, described by Jesus at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 3 to 12, are among the most counterintuitive and challenging teachings in the Bible. There, Jesus redefines profound concepts such as happiness, success, and blessing, leading us to reflect on what it truly means to live a blessed life in the eyes of God. It is almost an invitation to question what we see around us and how we measure ourselves by the world's standards. Today, we live in a culture that exalts material success, individualism, self-promotion, strength, and the idea that to be happy, one must be on top. But Jesus in his sermon makes us look in the opposite direction. He teaches us that those who are truly blessed are often on the margins, invisible to the world's eyes. The humble, the mournful, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. This sounds strange to our time, where happiness is sold in advertisements associated with possessions, fame, and status. Jesus begins by saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 5:3. In modern culture, being poor in spirit seems like something negative. We are constantly encouraged to be self-sufficient, to seek more, to not show weakness. However, what Jesus is saying here is the opposite. He is talking about humility. Recognizing our dependence on God and our human frailty is the first step toward experiencing true blessing. Being poor in spirit is admitting that we do not have all the answers, that we need something beyond ourselves, and this goes against the current mindset that everything depends solely on our effort. Another clear example is when he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Matthew 5, verse 4. How many times have we heard that happiness lies in avoiding suffering, in fleeing difficulties? Jesus, however, teaches us that true comfort comes from facing our pain with faith. He does not glorify suffering, but reminds us that life is not a straight line of pleasures and victories, and that mourning is part of the process of growth and transformation. Those who allow themselves to feel, who accept their fragilities, and trust in God for comfort, experience a peace that goes beyond circumstances. The Beatitudes also speak of justice in a way that challenges the standards of our time. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Matthew 5, verse 6. In a world where injustice is so often normalized, where we frequently see social inequality, corruption, and oppression, it is easy to become disheartened and think that nothing can be done. But Jesus calls us to hunger and thirst for justice, not as a passive desire, but as an active pursuit of a better world. To be hungry for justice is to refuse to accept the status quo, to desire to see the world aligned with God's heart, where compassion and truth prevail. Furthermore, he states, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Matthew 5, verse 7. In the competitive world we live in, where the pressure to be the best can harden our hearts, mercy is seen as weakness. However, Jesus teaches us that mercy is a path to true life. To be merciful means being able to forgive, to see the pain of others, and to act with compassion, something that in today's world can seem difficult amidst indifference and the fast pace of modern life that distances us from one another. And when Jesus says that peacemakers are blessed, Matthew 5, verse 9, he is calling us to be bridge builders in an increasingly polarized world. Peacemakers are those who, instead of fueling conflicts, seek reconciliation. They are not neutral or passive. They are those who actively seek peace and unity, even in times of division. In the age of the internet, where discussions and divisions are amplified, being a peacemaker is a challenge, but it is also a way to reflect God's character. So the Beatitudes are not just a collection of beautiful phrases. They are a radical invitation to a different life. They challenge the status quo and make us view the world in a completely new way. At its core, what Jesus is saying is that true happiness and blessing do not come from what the world values, but from a heart transformed by God's grace, seeking justice, mercy, and peace. These teachings continue to shape Christians today, calling us to a deeper and more meaningful life. Just as in Jesus' time, these words still confront and inspire us to live in a way that reflects the kingdom of God, rather than conforming to the superficial and fleeting standards of the modern world. The salt of the earth and the light of the world, the responsibility of Christians. In Matthew 5, verse 13 to 16, Jesus uses two powerful metaphors to describe the responsibility of Christians, the salt of the earth and the light of the world. These figures are not just symbolic, they carry a profound meaning about the mission that followers of Christ have in the world. Being salt and light involves not only an internal transformation, but also an external action, a positive and real influence on society. Today, perhaps more than ever, these words of Jesus resonate with an urgency and relevance that cannot be ignored. In Jesus' time, salt was one of the most valuable elements. It was used to preserve food in an era before refrigeration, as well as to enhance flavor. When Jesus calls us the salt of the earth, he is telling us that we have an essential role in preserving goodness in the world and adding flavor to life. This may seem abstract, but let's consider what it means in today's context. The world is filled with chaos, violence, and injustice. People are increasingly disconnected from each other and from values that could promote true peace and well-being. And where do Christians fit into this scenario? When Jesus talks about being the salt of the earth, he is reminding us that we are not called to live in isolation. We are here to make a difference, to prevent evil from spreading unchecked. Like salt, we are called to preserve what is good and just. And just as salt adds flavor to food, the Christian life should bring hope, joy, and purpose to those around us. Think about it. Have you ever stopped to reflect on how your actions impact the people around you? Whether at work, with family, or among friends, how have you seasoned your environment? Now let's address a question Jesus also raises. What if salt loses its flavor? If the salt loses its flavor, it is good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled by men. Matthew 5:13. This is a direct warning to those who, over time, become conformed to the world or lose their commitment to Christ's teachings. Nowadays, it is easy to be swayed by materialism, the hustle of life, or even the fear of being different. When we fail to live according to the gospel, we lose our flavor, our ability to positively influence people and the world. And what remains when salt doesn't season? When a Christian does not reflect Christ's character, they become irrelevant in their role of bringing life and preservation to the world.
In addition to being the salt of the earth, Jesus also calls us the light of the world. Light is indispensable. It illuminates the path, dispels darkness, and provides safety. We live in times where darkness can mean many things: misinformation, moral confusion, corruption, hopelessness. The world is crying out for clarity, direction, and truth. And who better to illuminate the path than those who know Christ's truth? Being the light of the world means being an example, reflecting God's goodness, and serving as a beacon amidst the chaos. Jesus tells us that a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. This means that when we live according to the gospel, our actions, our way of loving and treating others, our integrity and justice do not go unnoticed. We are like a city on a hill, visible to all. People look to us for direction, and often we become the only Bible they read. This is a privilege, but also a significant responsibility. How are we being this light to the world? Are we shining brightly, or have we dimmed our light out of fear of rejection? Today, being a light can mean many things. It might involve acting honestly in an environment where corruption is common, offering support and love when everyone around is practicing indifference, or standing up for justice even when it brings personal risk. Light is not just a passive idea. It actively illuminates the dark corners of society. Jesus concludes by saying, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Matthew 5:16. Good works are an essential part of that shine. They are not just a reflection of what we believe, but a living proof of the transformative power of the gospel. The world needs to see Christians living genuinely, not for personal glory, but so that God may be glorified. When we live this way, we leave a lasting impact. In summary, being the salt of the earth and the light of the world is a call to positively influence wherever we are. At school, at work, on social media, at home, every space can be a place where we season and illuminate the world with Christ's love. Our responsibility is significant, but with God's help, we can be instruments of real change, reflecting the kingdom of God in all that we do. The fulfillment of the law, Jesus as the realization of divine justice. When Jesus declares in Matthew 5:17-20 that he came to fulfill the law, he is establishing something profound and transformative. He did not come to abolish the rules or commandments of Moses, but to elevate the law to a higher level. This biblical passage is a key to understanding Christ's purpose in the world, and more importantly, to understanding how we should live our faith, especially in challenging times like those we face today. Many people today carry an enormous weight in their lives. Anxiety, depression, and discouragement are, unfortunately, increasingly common realities. We live in an era of overwhelming expectations, where we are pressured to be successful, happy, and productive all the time. And when we fail to meet these expectations, it's easy to fall into a cycle of guilt and frustration. Similarly, many people view their relationship with God in a similar way, an endless cycle of mistakes and failed attempts to live according to the rule. This cycle resembles ancient legalism, where the law was seen merely as a set of rules to be rigidly followed. But what Jesus shows us is something different, something that can liberate both those who feel crushed by anxiety and those who believe they will never be good enough. In the time of Moses, the law was given to the people of Israel as a guide, a way to lead them to justice and holiness. But over time, the focus shifted to fulfilling these commandments mechanically, almost without considering the spirit behind the rules. It was a system where external obedience became more important than the heart. Jesus, however, redefines this concept. He did not come to burden us with more rules, but to free us from a superficial interpretation of the law. He calls us to live more deeply, to understand that true justice begins from within, in the heart. Now, let us think about how this applies to people struggling with anxiety or depression today. We live in a world that constantly judges us by what we do or don't do. If we are not sufficiently productive, if we don't seem happy all the time, society tells us that we are failing. This generates immense internal pressure, and many end up feeling that they are not good enough, whether at work, in relationships, or even in spiritual life. This weight of external expectations can resemble ancient legalism, where a person's worth was measured by how well they could follow the rules. But what Jesus teaches us is that it's not about following rules externally, but about transforming the heart. He fulfills the law by showing us that love, grace, and forgiveness are more important than any external conformity. For those struggling with the weight of anxiety, this is a liberating message. Jesus does not judge us by how well we perform. He looks at us with compassion, understanding our struggles, and offering us a rest that the world cannot provide. When he says he came to fulfill the law, he is showing that true justice is not based on how perfect we can be in the eyes of the world or religion, but on how deeply we allow love and grace to transform our lives. The love Jesus demonstrated in fulfilling the law goes far beyond mere obedience to norms. He sacrificed himself so that we could live in freedom, without the weight of condemnation that many of us feel, whether from our own mistakes or the unrealistic expectations imposed on us. For those who suffer from a constant sense of failing, Jesus' message is a relief. He tells us that he has already fulfilled the law in our place, that we do not need to bear the weight alone. His invitation is for us to stop trying to meet unrealistic expectations and instead to embrace his grace. And this leads us to an important reflection. If Jesus offers us this grace, why do we often behave as if we are trying to earn our acceptance? Just as in the time when Jesus walked the earth, today there are still many who cling to legalism, who believe that merely following a list of rules will bring them peace or security. However, those who live in this cycle, like people suffering from anxiety or depression, end up feeling that they are never enough, that they are always failing. Jesus changes this completely. He teaches us that true justice and holiness do not come from external perfection, but from a heart shaped by love. He fulfills the law by showing us that the path to God is not heavy and oppressive, but liberating and full of grace. For those who are weary and burdened, he offers rest. This does not mean we should not strive to live according to God's values, but rather that this effort should come from a place of love and gratitude, not fear or pressure. Today, when we see so many people exhausted from trying to be enough, whether at work, on social media, or even in spiritual life, Jesus' message is more relevant than ever. He fulfilled the law so that we could live lightly and freely, knowing that our justice does not depend on our works, but on what he has already done for us. Prayer and inner life, the Lord's Prayer and intimate spirituality. When was the last time you truly felt connected to God in prayer? In the hustle and bustle of daily life, it's easy to feel that our prayers become automatic, isn't it? Often, we repeat words without pausing to deeply reflect on what we are saying. But in Matthew 6:5-15, Jesus offers us a model of prayer that goes far beyond habitual words. The Lord's Prayer. When Jesus teaches about the Lord's Prayer, he is not merely providing a formula to be followed mechanically. He is inviting us to something deeper, something that involves our hearts. In Jesus' time, prayers were often made publicly, so that people would be seen as holy or religious. The problem was, in the process, prayer ceased to be an intimate conversation with God and became a performance. Doesn't that sound a bit like today? Today, we live in a reality where we are constantly encouraged to display our spirituality on social media or use beautiful words to impress. And here's an important question. Is our prayer life being affected by this culture? Are we praying just to be seen or as a task to be completed? Jesus, in teaching the Lord's Prayer, challenges us to return to what truly matters, an authentic and intimate conversation with the Father. Jesus begins with, "Our Father in heaven." This simple phrase already teaches us a lot. To him, God is not just a distant, impersonal force. He is a loving Father who cares about every detail of our lives. In today's world, where so many people face feelings of loneliness, discouragement, and even anxiety, Remembering that we have a Father who is present and ready to listen is a tremendous source of comfort. Have you thought about that? Now you might be thinking, but how can this prayer shape my life? The answer lies in the purpose it carries. The Lord's Prayer is not just a set of beautiful words. It is an invitation to live differently, aligning our hearts with God's. For example, when we say, "Your kingdom come, your will be done," in a society that encourages us to always pursue what we want, the phrase, "your will be done," is a shock, isn't it? We are surrendering our wills into God's hands. We are acknowledging that He knows what is best for us. And what about the part where we ask for our daily bread? Today, in a world where concerns about the future and anxiety about tomorrow affect so many people, this request reminds us that we can trust God to provide what we need today. How many times have you found yourself anxious about bills, work, or your family's future? Jesus invites us, through this prayer, to cast those anxieties on God, asking only for what we need for the present moment. Isn't that a liberating way to live? Do not be anxious, trusting in God amidst uncertainty. Have you ever found yourself worried about the future? Perhaps wondering how you'll pay the bills at the end of the month, or fearing that something might go wrong at work or in your personal life? Today, anxiety seems to be an integral part of almost everyone's life. But in Matthew 6:25-34, Jesus presents a message that goes against the grain. He invites us not to be anxious, but to trust in God to take care of our daily needs. And the big question here is, are we really living out that trust? When Jesus speaks of not being anxious, He touches on something that is extremely relevant today. We live in a world full of uncertainties, financial, professional, emotional uncertainties, and these uncertainties fuel anxiety. How many times have you found yourself scrolling through your phone late at night, unable to sleep, with a racing mind full of worries about tomorrow? This is the state of many people, a state of constant restlessness, and it is here that Jesus' message becomes a true antidote. Jesus uses simple yet powerful examples. He asks us to look at the birds of the sky and the lilies of the field. Look at the birds, He says. They do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And then He asks, are you not much more valuable than they? It is impossible not to pause and reflect on this question. If God takes care of creation in such a generous way, why wouldn't we trust that He will take care of us? Of course, this trust does not mean that we will not face challenges or that everything will always go as planned. Bills will continue to come, problems will arise, but the big question Jesus poses is, does our anxiety solve anything? In verse 27, He asks, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? And if we think about it, the answer is obvious. We cannot control the future, and anxiety does nothing to change that. Now, bringing this reflection to the present, it's easy to see how anxiety is on the rise. We are living in times of global uncertainties, from economic crises to issues related to mental health. The pressures of modern life seem to be more intense than ever. Social media bombards us with perfect life standards, creating a constant comparison that fuels the feeling of not being enough. As a result, many people find themselves trapped in a cycle of fear about the future. Is it really possible to trust in God in this context? Here lies a fundamental part of Jesus' teaching. Trust in God is not passive. He does not call us to sit idly by and wait for things to resolve themselves. Instead, He calls us to put our faith into action, to believe that God will provide while we continue to live according to the values He teaches us. This means acting with wisdom, being prudent, but not letting fear paralyze us. Think for a moment. In which areas of your life do you struggle the most to trust in God? It might be finances, family relationships, or even your health. Perhaps you feel pressured to control everything, and the idea of handing over those concerns to God seems impossible. But it is precisely in these areas that Jesus invites us to practice active trust. He challenges us to live a life where, even amidst uncertainty, we find peace, knowing that our Heavenly Father is in control. Another interesting point is that Jesus ends this passage with a reminder that seems tailor-made for our times. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Matthew 6:34. How often is our anxiety directly linked to things that haven't even happened yet? We anticipate problems, imagine negative scenarios, creating a distress that, most of the time, never materializes. Jesus reminds us that the focus should be on the present, that today is what we have in our hands. So how can we practice this trust amidst the whirlwind of uncertainties we face? The answer lies in balance. On one hand, we must do our part, be responsible with our finances, work diligently, care for our relationships and our mental health. But on the other hand, we need to learn to hand over what is beyond our control to God. After all, He has shown countless times that He takes care of us. And here's a question for you to ponder. What would happen if, instead of trying to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, you trusted that God is taking care of the details? Maybe, just maybe, you would discover a peace that surpasses human understanding. The same peace Jesus promises when he says, "Do not be anxious." Perhaps what you need today is a step of faith. To trust that, even amidst the pressures and uncertainties, God is in control. Are we willing to take that step? So amidst the rush of daily life and the pressures of an uncertain world, Jesus' message invites us to rest. Do not be anxious is not just advice, it is a call to trust. He shows us that life is much more than accumulating worries. It is about learning to live in the assurance that God, our Father, takes care of every detail. But this trust is not built overnight. It requires practice. It requires that we daily surrender our anxieties and fears to Him. The path will not always be easy, but Jesus' promise is clear. God is in control, and He will give us what we need. And if you're feeling overwhelmed today, remember, you are not alone. God is taking care of you, even when everything seems uncertain. How about reflecting on this and taking a step of faith? Trust God with your problems today, and allow Him to calm your mind and heart. After all, as Jesus reminds us, tomorrow will take care of itself. If this message has touched you in some way, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring more reflections that help strengthen faith and trust in God. Share this message with those you love, and together, let's live a life of less anxiety and more trust in divine care.